Emily Parker had always prided herself on the stability she had built over the years. At 45, her life was a careful balance of family, career, and community. Each day unfolded with predictable certainty, waking up early to make breakfast for her husband, Greg, and their daughter Lily, working a steady 9-to-5 job at a local marketing firm, then coming home to tidy the house and prepare for the evening. She had created a comfortable, almost choreographed rhythm for herself, one that was satisfying in its own quiet way. But even in this calm, structured life, there was an unspoken ache, a feeling Emily couldn't quite shake. Something was missing, or maybe, it was that nothing was truly alive anymore. She had been married to Greg for over 20 years. He was a good man, dependable and loving. But in the past few years, Emily couldn't ignore the growing distance between them. It wasn't that Greg had done anything wrong, it was more about the space that had quietly grown between them, a space where they no longer shared as much as they once had. Her marriage had become a partnership of convenience, built on years of shared memories and mutual respect, but devoid of the passion and excitement she had once felt. Lily, now 18, was preparing to leave for college soon, and the thought of her daughter being away filled Emily with a mix of pride and a strange, unexpected sadness. The house would be quieter, emptier. And with Lily's departure, Emily couldn't help but wonder what her role in the house, in their family, would be. She was proud of her daughter, but the silence that would follow her departure felt overwhelming. At work, Emily had achieved a great deal. She had climbed the corporate ladder and earned a reputation for being dependable, efficient, and highly respected. But lately, the work had started to feel more like a series of tasks to check off rather than something that ignited her passion. Was this what life was about, routines, obligations, and waiting for the next chapter to begin? She wondered if she was merely going through the motions, letting life pass by without truly feeling alive. The first encounter with David. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Emily found herself outside, taking a walk around the neighborhood. She'd recently heard that a new family had moved in next door, but hadn't yet taken the time to meet them. As she rounded the corner of her street, she noticed a man standing outside the house next to hers, a tall figure with graying hair and a kind smile. He was unpacking boxes from the back of a moving truck, his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows, showing off muscular arms that had aged with grace. He looked like someone who had lived a full life, a life rich with stories and experiences. There was an air of quiet confidence about him that was both refreshing and unsettling. David Collins, the new neighbor, noticed her approach and gave her a warm, friendly smile. "Hi there. I'm David Collins," he said, extending his hand. "Just moved in. Sorry about the mess. It's going to take me a while to get everything sorted out." Emily, caught off guard by the genuine warmth in his voice, returned the smile and shook his hand. "Emily Parker. Welcome to the neighborhood. If you need any help with anything, feel free to ask." "Thanks. It's nice to meet you, Emily. How long have you lived here?" "About 15 years now. It's a quiet neighborhood." "You'll get used to it," she said, a little too quickly, before realizing how empty the words sounded. She had always been content with the quiet, but was she? David's presence seemed to fill the space around her in a way that was impossible to ignore. His voice, his laughter, the ease with which he carried himself, it was all so different from the life Emily had settled into. As they continued to chat, Emily felt herself becoming more at ease, a rarity in her often solitary existence. They talked about the neighborhood, their families, and even a bit about work. David was recently divorced, he said, and had relocated for a fresh start. By the time they said their goodbyes, Emily's mind was already racing. The encounter had lasted only a few minutes, but it had stirred something in her, a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Curiosity, maybe, or something more. She wasn't sure, but one thing was clear: she had been drawn to David in a way that felt unfamiliar. Back home with Greg. Later that evening, after dinner, Emily sat with Greg on the couch, the TV playing softly in the background. Lily was upstairs, packing for her upcoming trip to college. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the television and the occasional clink of dishes being put away. "How was your walk today?" Greg asked, his voice casual. "It was fine. I met the new neighbor," Emily replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "Really? What's he like?" Greg's voice held a hint of curiosity, but Emily couldn't help but notice that it lacked the excitement she might have expected from him. "His name's David Collins. He just moved in next door. He seems nice." Greg nodded absent-mindedly, not looking up from the television. Well, that's good. Another person to join the neighborhood. Emily watched him for a moment, feeling a wave of sadness wash over her. It was as if their marriage, too, had become a series of routines, exchanges without passion or real connection. She had always felt safe with Greg, but now in this moment, she wondered if she had ever felt truly seen by him. The thought unsettled her. She shook it off and focused back on the TV. But in the back of her mind, David's face lingered. The days after Emily met David Collins felt different. It wasn't as though the world had shifted on its axis, but there was a subtle change within her. Something small, yet significant, had been stirred. She tried to shake it off. After all, it was just a brief conversation with a friendly neighbor. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized she couldn't stop thinking about him. Every time she looked out the window, David was there, working in his yard, unpacking boxes, or mowing the lawn. She found herself watching him from the corner of her eye, her heart betraying her calm demeanor. At the grocery store the following weekend, Emily was surprised to see David in the same aisle. She hadn't planned on running into him, but there he was, standing by the produce, examining some ripe tomatoes. "Hey, Emily. Fancy meeting you here," David called out with a smile, his deep voice cutting through the quiet hum of the store. Emily froze for a moment, unsure of what to say, but then smiled back. "Hi, David. Didn't expect to see you shopping here." "Yeah, well, I'm learning the ropes. I'm starting to get the hang of this whole grocery shopping thing. It's been a while since I've had to do it myself." His smile was playful, and it immediately put her at ease. They chatted about the weather, and David mentioned his recent move, giving Emily more insight into his life. He'd recently gone through a divorce, and the move was part of his effort to start fresh. His ex-wife still lived in the city, and he had no immediate family in the area. "It's strange, you know," David said, his voice softening as he glanced down at the tomatoes in his hand. "I never really thought about starting over. But sometimes, life just pushes you in that direction. You know?" Emily nodded, her heart suddenly feeling heavy. She could relate to that feeling more than she cared to admit. The thought of starting fresh, of changing her life in some way, had lingered in her mind ever since their first conversation. She was the one who had always been focused on keeping things together, her marriage, her family, her career. But now, she found herself wondering, was it enough? Was it all there was? Shared interests and growing conversations. Over the next few weeks, Emily and David began seeing each other more often by chance, but always with a feeling of familiarity that was hard to ignore. She would see him in the neighborhood, walking his dog, or working in the garden. It was during these moments that they'd exchange small talk, but Emily noticed something shifting beneath the surface. Their conversations had started to feel more personal, more engaging. One afternoon, as Emily walked home from the library, she saw David sitting on his porch, sipping coffee. Without thinking, she stopped. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, surprised at herself for the boldness of the question. David looked up and smiled warmly, motioning to the empty chair beside him. "Of course. Please, have a seat." They spent the next hour talking, with Emily feeling more at ease than she had in months. David shared stories about his life before the divorce, his travels, and even his childhood. Emily listened intently, fascinated by his easygoing manner and the way he spoke about his past with both humor and vulnerability. "I used to think I had it all figured out," David said, his voice a little more serious now. "But life has a way of knocking you down when you least expect it. I guess that's when you really find out what you're made of." There was a pause as David took a sip of his coffee. Emily felt the weight of his words settle in her chest, a gentle reminder of the struggles that had shaped him, and of her own hidden fears about what might lie ahead for her. "Do you ever feel like you've missed out on something?" Emily asked suddenly, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "Like there's more to life than what you've been living?" David raised an eyebrow but didn't hesitate before answering. "All the time. I think a lot of people do. They get stuck in their routines and forget to live." Emily smiled softly, her gaze drifting to the quiet street before her. For a moment, it felt like she and David were in sync, as though they were both speaking the same unspoken truth. Conflicted emotions. The conversations continued, casual but laden with an underlying tension Emily couldn't shake. It was as if David had become a mirror, reflecting back all the desires and dreams she had quietly suppressed over the years. She found herself opening up to him in ways she hadn't with anyone in a long time, talking about her marriage, her hopes for the future, and even her fears. But as much as she cherished these exchanges, Emily's heart grew heavier with each passing day. Her relationship with Greg had always been her foundation, but lately, it felt like that foundation was slowly crumbling. She loved Greg, of course, but their bond no longer felt vibrant. It was as if the passion and connection they once shared had dissipated, leaving behind only the remnants of a comfortable companionship. And then there was David. His presence stirred something in Emily that she hadn't felt in years. She couldn't deny it any longer. Every time she saw him, she felt her heart race, her stomach flutter. It wasn't just his charm, though that was certainly part of it. It was the way he made her feel alive again, like she was more than just a wife and mother, more than just a woman caught in the monotony of everyday life. The guilt was overwhelming, and Emily knew she had to confront it. But how? What did it mean for her family, for Greg, for the life she had built if she allowed herself to be drawn deeper into David's orbit? The turning point. One evening, after another seemingly innocent chat with David, Emily found herself walking home with a knot in her stomach. The guilt was suffocating. She hadn't even told Greg about the growing friendship with David, though she knew she should. But every time she thought about bringing it up, she felt a rush of panic. How could she explain this? How could she tell Greg that she was feeling things she hadn't felt in years? As Emily walked down her street, she noticed Greg's car in the driveway. It was almost time for dinner, and Lily would be home soon, preparing for the last few weeks before she left for college. Emily's life was about to change, and she could feel the weight of that truth in every step she took. David's face flashed in her mind again. The way he smiled. The way he made her feel. Emily couldn't deny it any longer. Her life was on the brink of something she wasn't sure she was ready for. But the question now was, would she dare to explore what lay beyond her carefully constructed routine, or would she stay, trapped in the life she had built, too afraid to break free? Emily woke up early the next day, the crisp autumn air flowing gently through the open window. It was a Saturday, and for the first time in weeks, she felt an unexpected sense of anticipation. It wasn't just the usual buzz of the weekend, there was something different in the air. As she sipped her coffee, her mind kept drifting back to David. It had been a few days since their last conversation, and yet the warmth of his smile, the way he listened with such genuine interest, kept replaying in her mind. She hadn't realized how much she missed being seen, truly seen, by someone until David made her feel that way. It wasn't that Greg didn't see her, it was more that he seemed to take her presence for granted, as if she were just a fixture in their home, someone who was always there, reliable, dependable. But David made her feel like she mattered. Like her thoughts, her feelings, her experiences, all of them were worthy of attention. The growing distance with Greg. That afternoon, Greg was in the garage, tinkering with his tools, a habit that had become more frequent in the last few months. He had always been a practical man, content with fixing things around the house or spending time working on his car, his way of unwinding after a long week. Emily had never minded it. After all, it was just part of their rhythm. But today, as she glanced toward the garage, she felt a sharp pang of loneliness. She realized that she hadn't truly connected with Greg in weeks. The conversations had become routine: where to place the furniture, what to have for dinner, when to go grocery shopping. There was no spark, no deep connection. Greg emerged from the garage, wiping his hands on a rag, looking content with his work. "Hey Emily," he greeted her, a smile on his face, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "How was your day?" "It was fine," Emily replied, not really looking at him, her mind still occupied with thoughts of David. Greg took a step closer and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You seem distracted. Everything all right?" Emily smiled, but it didn't feel genuine. She wanted to tell him what was on her mind, how her heart had been pulled in an unexpected direction, how she was torn between the life she knew and the excitement that had come out of nowhere. But the words didn't come. Instead, she simply nodded. "I'm fine," she said, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. "Just tired." Greg didn't press further. He wasn't one to push when things weren't immediately obvious. He was, after all, a man of few words. He pulled a chair out from the kitchen table, signaling it was time for dinner. Later that evening, after dinner, Emily couldn't shake the thoughts of David. Her heart raced when she thought about their last conversation, the way he had looked at her with those warm brown eyes, as if he could see straight into her soul. She had shared things with him that she hadn't shared with anyone in years. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how much she was yearning for more of those conversations. More of the way David made her feel seen and understood. It wasn't just the physical attraction, it was something deeper, something emotional. She had been so focused on her responsibilities as a wife and mother that she had lost sight of who she was beyond those roles. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from David. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the text. "Hey Emily, I'm heading out for a walk in the park this afternoon. Would you like to join me? I'd love to catch up more." For a moment, Emily hesitated. The rational part of her, her responsible side, reminded her of her commitments. She had a family. She had a life. But something in her, something deep inside her, whispered that this was her chance to break free from the monotony, to feel something real again. After a few minutes of deliberation, Emily found herself typing a quick response. "I'd love to. What time?" David replied almost immediately. 2 p.m.? I'll be waiting by the old oak tree in the park. Hope to see you there." Emily stared at the message for a moment, her heart thudding in her chest. This was happening. She was about to meet David again, but this time, it wasn't just a casual conversation. This time, it felt like something more. The afternoon arrived, and Emily found herself standing in front of the mirror, adjusting her jacket. She wasn't sure what she was expecting from this walk, but she knew it wasn't just a friendly meeting. Her heart was racing, and her palms were slightly sweaty. When she arrived at the park, she saw David standing by the old oak tree, his hands in his pockets, looking casual yet effortlessly handsome. The sight of him caused a flutter in her chest, and she couldn't help but feel self-conscious as she approached. David's face lit up when he saw her. "Hey Emily. You made it." "Of course," she replied, smiling nervously. "I wasn't sure, but I'm glad I did." They began walking along the park's winding paths, surrounded by the colors of fall. The leaves crunched beneath their feet, and the cool air felt refreshing on Emily's face. They talked about everything and nothing, work, the changing seasons, even their childhoods. It was easy, too easy. Emily found herself laughing freely, something she hadn't done in a long time. David had a way of making her feel at ease, and before long, she was telling him things she had kept locked away for years. "I don't know what's happening to me, David," Emily confessed, her voice softer now. "I feel like I've been living in this bubble for so long, just going through the motions. I'm starting to wonder if there's more out there, something different." David stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes we don't realize what we're missing until something, or someone, comes along to show us." "I get it, Emily. I really do." His words hit her harder than she expected, like a quiet validation of everything she had been feeling. But before she could say more, David reached out and gently touched her arm, his hand lingering there for a moment longer than necessary. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she felt a rush of heat spread through her body. The air between them shifted, and she realized for the first time that she was standing on the edge of something that could change everything. As they continued walking, Emily felt herself becoming more aware of her own emotions. The walls she had carefully constructed over the years began to crack, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel vulnerable. David's presence made her feel alive, in a way that Greg hadn't in years. They stopped by the lake, the sun casting a golden glow across the water. David turned to her, his expression serious. "Emily, I want you to know. I'm not trying to pressure you into anything. But I feel something here, something real. And I think you do too." Emily swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. Part of her wanted to deny it, to push him away, to return to her safe, familiar life. But another part of her, the part that had been quietly yearning for something more, knew he was right. "I don't know what to do with this," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "I'm married, David. I have a family. This, whatever this is, it's not something I can just ignore." David nodded, his eyes full of understanding. "I'm not asking you to make a decision now, Emily. I just want you to know that I'm here. Whenever you're ready." Emily lay awake that night, staring up at the ceiling, the weight of her thoughts pressing heavily against her chest. The conversation she had with David earlier that afternoon was still playing in her mind, looping endlessly. The park, the lake, the way his fingers had brushed against her arm, every moment felt more intense than the last. She had always prided herself on being a woman of principle, someone who stayed true to her commitments. Yet, here she was, feeling more confused than ever. She was married to Greg, a man who had stood by her through thick and thin, and they had built a life together. But lately, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. David had awoken something within her, something that had been dormant for years. It wasn't just physical attraction, though there was no denying the chemistry between them, it was the emotional connection that terrified her. She shifted in bed, trying to find a comfortable position, but it was futile. The guilt gnawed at her insides, unrelenting and fierce. Was it wrong to feel this way? Was she betraying Greg, the man who had given her everything? And yet, as much as she tried to push the feelings away, they wouldn't go. They had taken root in her heart, and no amount of reasoning could make them disappear. The strain with Greg. The next morning, Emily tried to carry on as though everything were normal. But as soon as she walked into the kitchen, she saw Greg sitting at the table, sipping his coffee. His tired eyes looked up at her, and for a brief moment, she wondered if he could see the turmoil inside her. "Morning," Greg said, his voice casual but with a hint of concern. "Good morning," Emily replied, her voice tight. She didn't know how to act around him anymore. The normalcy of their life together felt like a lie, a facade she had been hiding behind for too long. As she went about her morning routine, Emily couldn't help but notice how distant Greg had become. He was still the man she had married, the one she had shared countless memories with. But over the years, their intimacy had dwindled. It wasn't just the lack of physical affection, it was the emotional distance, the subtle cracks that had appeared in their connection. Greg didn't ask about her day anymore. He didn't seem to notice when she was upset or when she felt disconnected. In a way, she felt like a stranger in her own marriage. She set the table for breakfast, the sound of the plates clinking against each other filling the silence between them. "Are you okay, Emily?" Greg asked, breaking the quiet. Emily froze, her hands lingering on the edge of the table. She looked at him, his face etched with concern. She could tell that he knew something was off, but he didn't know what. And she didn't know how to explain it. "I'm fine," she said, forcing a smile. "Just a little tired. It's been a long week." Greg nodded, but she could see the doubt in his eyes. He had always been perceptive, but lately, they seemed to have drifted apart in a way that made it difficult to even talk to each other. The emotional tug-of-war. As the week passed, Emily found herself growing more distant from Greg. The weight of her feelings for David was becoming too much to ignore. Every time she saw Greg, she felt the guilt and shame rise in her chest, like a heavy burden she couldn't put down. David, on the other hand, was always just a text away. Their conversations had become a lifeline for Emily. They had been texting each other more frequently, sharing small glimpses of their days. There was an ease between them that she didn't have with Greg anymore. One evening, as Emily sat at the kitchen table, trying to focus on a work email, her phone buzzed. It was a message from David. "Hey, Emily. I've been thinking about you. I really enjoyed our walk the other day. Maybe we can do it again soon." Her heart skipped a beat as she read his words. She had promised herself that she wouldn't get too caught up in this, that she would stay committed to her marriage. But every time David reached out to her, it felt like a little thread was being pulled at her heart, unraveling everything she had carefully built. Before she could respond, Greg walked into the room. He looked at her phone, then back at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Who are you texting?" he asked, his tone casual, but Emily could sense a hint of suspicion. Emily froze. She wasn't ready for this conversation, not now, not when she was already feeling so conflicted. But the words spilled out before she could stop them. "It's just a friend from the neighborhood," she said quickly, trying to downplay it. Greg raised an eyebrow. "A friend? You've been texting him a lot lately." The guilt hit her like a wave. She couldn't lie to him, not anymore. But she didn't know how to explain what was happening inside her. She felt trapped, caught between her loyalty to Greg and the undeniable pull she felt toward David. "It's nothing," Emily said, her voice shaking slightly. "Just someone to talk to. I'm not doing anything wrong." Greg didn't push further, but Emily could see the doubt in his eyes. The conversation had ended there, but she could feel the unspoken tension hanging in the air. She had just lied to him, again. And each time she did, it felt like a small betrayal, like a piece of herself slipping away. A moment of clarity. Later that evening, Emily sat alone in the living room, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. She could hear Greg in the bedroom, getting ready for bed. He had already turned in early, his back to her as he lay down under the covers. Emily had joined him briefly, but her mind was elsewhere. She got up and went to the window, gazing out into the darkened street. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the neighborhood felt calm, almost peaceful. But Emily's mind was anything but at peace. She couldn't stop thinking about David. She couldn't stop feeling the tension between the life she had and the life she wanted. For the first time in months, Emily allowed herself to feel the full weight of her emotions. She wasn't just feeling guilty about her growing feelings for David, she was grieving the loss of the connection she once had with Greg. And she was scared of what her desires meant, scared of what they might cost her. As she stood there, her heart heavy with the weight of it all, Emily realized something. She had been living her life for others. For Greg. For Lily. For everyone except herself. And now, for the first time in years, she was being faced with the question of who she was when no one else was watching. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from David. I know we're both busy, but I just wanted to let you know I'm thinking of you. Emily stared at the message, her heart pounding. She could feel herself slipping deeper into something she wasn't sure she was ready for. But as much as she tried to suppress it, the desire for change, for something more, was undeniable. Emily sat in the dimly lit kitchen, the faint glow of the evening light filtering through the blinds. She had been sitting there for hours, staring at the same cup of tea that had long gone cold. The house around her was quiet, too quiet. Greg had gone to bed early, as usual. Lily was spending the night with a friend before leaving for college in just a few days. The silence was suffocating, but Emily didn't know how to fill it. The weight of the decision that loomed over her was too heavy to ignore. She had never thought her life would come to this point, a point where she was torn between the stability of her marriage and the magnetic pull of someone who made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. David's words echoed in her mind, the way he had told her he wanted to get to know her better, that he was willing to wait for her to figure things out. He wasn't pushing her, but with every conversation, every shared moment, it became harder to deny the connection between them. And every time she saw him, her heart fluttered in a way it hadn't since the early days of her marriage to Greg. But there was a part of Emily that resisted, a part that still clung to the life she had built, to the man who had stood by her side for more than 2 decades. Greg was not a perfect husband, but he was steady, reliable, and kind. She couldn't deny the guilt that weighed on her. How could she even think of betraying him? And yet, with each passing day, the gulf between them seemed to widen. The conversation with Sarah. The following day, Emily called Sarah, her closest friend, for a much-needed heart-to-heart. Sarah had been a steady presence in Emily's life, someone who had always encouraged her to follow her heart. But this was different. Emily wasn't sure if she was ready to admit how much her heart had begun to shift. When Sarah answered the phone, her voice was light and cheerful, a stark contrast to the heaviness Emily was feeling. Hey Emily. What's up? You sound a little off. I need to talk, Emily said, her voice tight. It's about Greg, and about David. I don't know what to do anymore. There was a brief pause before Sarah responded. Okay, let's talk. Where are you? I'm at home. I don't know how to even begin. I'll be there in 20, Sarah said, and Emily could hear the concern in her voice. When Sarah arrived, she wasted no time. She poured them both glasses of wine and sat across from Emily at the kitchen table, waiting patiently for Emily to speak. Okay, Emily. Spill it. What's going on? Emily sighed deeply, staring into her wine glass. I don't know what I'm doing. I've been having these feelings for David. I can't stop thinking about him. It's like I'm waking up from a long sleep and realizing that I've been living in a fog for years. But I'm married. And I love Greg. I'm so confused. Sarah's eyes softened with understanding. I can see how you'd be torn. Greg's a good guy, and you've been together a long time. But I also see that you're not the same person you were when you first married him. You've changed, Emily. And so has your marriage. I know, but does that give me the right to just walk away from everything? Greg has been there for me, for our family. I can't just throw all of that away because of some connection with someone else. Sarah leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. It's not about throwing everything away. It's about finding out what you need for yourself. What makes you happy? This isn't about David. This is about you and your own desires. What do you want, Emily? Emily closed her eyes, feeling the weight of Sarah's words settle in her chest. I don't know. I don't know what I want anymore. That's okay, Sarah said softly. But you can't keep ignoring it. You have to face it, Emily. You have to ask yourself if you're living the life you want. If you're truly happy. If not, then maybe it's time to make some changes. The night of reflection. That evening, after Sarah left, Emily found herself walking through the house, picking up the scattered remnants of the life she had built with Greg. She picked up a photo frame on the mantel, one of their wedding pictures. She looked at their smiling faces, so young and full of promise. The years had softened their features, but the love was still there, at least on the surface. She remembered the excitement she had felt when they first got married, the dreams they shared of building a life together. But now, all she saw in the photo was a woman who had slowly lost herself along the way. The daily grind of responsibilities, the comfort of routine, the absence of excitement, somewhere along the line, they had become strangers living parallel lives. Emily walked into the kitchen and stared out the window at the quiet street. She knew Greg was asleep, but her mind was racing. She needed to make a decision. She needed to figure out who she was outside of her roles as wife and mother. She had spent so long living for everyone else, her family, her job, her community, but when was the last time she truly asked herself what she wanted? Her phone buzzed again. It was another message from David. I know you're busy, but I'm thinking about you. Let me know if you want to talk. Emily's fingers hovered over the screen, the weight of her heart pressing against her chest. She wanted to text him back, wanted to feel the connection again. But what would it mean? What was she willing to lose in order to gain something new? Her reflection in the window seemed to look back at her, searching for an answer she wasn't sure how to find. A daring decision. As the days passed, Emily continued to wrestle with her emotions. She and Greg had not had an honest conversation about their relationship in months, and now with David occupying more and more of her thoughts, it felt impossible to ignore the growing distance. One afternoon, while Greg was out running errands, Emily sat down and began writing. She wrote a letter, not to David, not to Greg, but to herself. In it, she poured out all the fears, desires, and doubts she had been carrying. She acknowledged the emptiness she felt in her marriage, the longing she had been denying for so long. She wrote about the parts of herself that had been buried under the weight of responsibilities, the parts that still dreamed, still desired, still wanted to feel alive. The letter wasn't a solution. It wasn't an answer to her dilemma. But it was a starting point, a moment of clarity, a recognition that she couldn't keep running from her own desires. When Greg returned, Emily knew it was time to have the conversation. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. She couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. It was time to stop living for others and start living for herself. The days after Emily's decision to confront her feelings felt like an emotional battleground. Every moment seemed fraught with tension between the life she had known for years and the life she was beginning to envision for herself. She had made a promise to herself that she would be honest with Greg, that she would no longer run from the truth of her heart. But the truth, she had learned, wasn't always as simple as it seemed. It was an early Saturday morning when she finally decided to speak to Greg. They had spent the night in separate rooms, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. Emily had spent the last few nights tossing and turning, wrestling with her own emotions, but today, she couldn't put it off any longer. She needed to know where she stood, not just in her marriage, but with herself. She walked into the kitchen, where Greg was already brewing coffee. His back was to her as he stirred the pot, the rhythmic motion of his hand a reminder of the quiet, predictable life they had built together. But Emily knew she could no longer live in the comfort of predictability. Something inside her had changed, and she needed to face it. Greg, she said, her voice soft but steady. He turned around, his expression neutral. Hey Em. You're up early. Everything okay? She nodded, though her heart was pounding in her chest. This wasn't going to be easy. I've been thinking about a lot of things lately, she began, choosing her words carefully. About us. About what we've built together and where we're headed. Greg put the coffee down and turned to face her fully, concern now visible on his face. What's this about, Emily? She took a deep breath, gathering the courage she had been avoiding for weeks. I've been feeling disconnected from you. I don't know when it started, but it feels like we've lost something, Greg. Something that I can't ignore anymore. Greg's brow furrowed, and he took a step closer. What do you mean? You're talking about our marriage? We've had our ups and downs, but we've been through a lot. We're okay, aren't we? Emily shook her head, feeling the weight of her words pressing down on her. I don't think we are, Greg. I've been holding on to something that isn't there anymore, and I need to be honest with you. I'm not happy. And I haven't been for a long time. The silence between them was deafening. Greg stood frozen, the shock of her words slowly registering. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. I didn't want to hurt you, Greg, Emily continued, her voice trembling. But I've been emotionally distant for months, and I think you've noticed. There's someone else. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Greg's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. What do you mean? Someone else? Is this about him? This new guy? Emily nodded, her heart breaking with every word. Yes. It's about him. David. Greg's face contorted with a mixture of confusion and hurt. So, you've been seeing him behind my back? His voice cracked, and Emily could hear the pain in his words. No, Greg. I haven't been seeing him, not like that. But I've been talking to him. And something has changed inside me. He makes me feel seen again, Greg. He makes me feel like I'm more than just a wife and a mother. She took a step back, her hands shaking. I don't want to hurt you. But I can't lie to myself anymore. I'm not sure where this is all headed, but I needed to tell you the truth. Greg stood silent for what felt like an eternity. The kitchen felt cold, the space between them wide and unbridgeable. Emily, I don't know what to say, Greg finally spoke, his voice flat. You've been talking to him, and now you're telling me this? We've been together for so long, and this is how it ends. Emily felt her chest tighten. It's not about it ending, Greg. It's about me finding out who I am. And I'm not sure who I am anymore in this marriage. I love you, but I don't feel like I can give you the love you deserve when I'm so lost inside myself. Greg ran a hand through his hair, frustration and hurt evident in his every movement. So what then? You want to leave me? You want to leave this? Our life, our daughter. Emily's heart ached at the thought of tearing their family apart. I don't know, Greg. I don't know what I want yet. I need time to figure it out. But I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it's not. Greg turned away, his back to her now. Emily could hear him struggling to keep his composure, but she knew he was breaking. I don't want to lose you, Emily. I don't want to lose what we have, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But if you're already thinking about someone else, then maybe we've already lost it. David's role in Emily's life. Later that afternoon, Emily found herself standing at her bedroom window, staring out at the street below. Her conversation with Greg had left her feeling drained, emotionally spent. She hadn't expected him to react with understanding, but she hadn't expected the raw hurt in his eyes either. She thought about David. She hadn't told him about her conversation with Greg, and she wasn't sure how to. But in some ways, it felt like David had already played a significant role in her emotional awakening. He had become a mirror of sorts, a reflection of what she was missing, not just in her marriage but in her own sense of self. Emily didn't know where things with David were headed, but she knew she couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward him. There was a connection between them that had become undeniable, something she had never experienced with Greg. But could she truly pursue that connection when her marriage was in such turmoil? She couldn't deny the truth that had been brewing inside her, the desire for something more, for a life that was hers and hers alone. But could she find that without losing everything she had built with Greg? A difficult decision. That evening, after the conversation with Greg, Emily sat down at the kitchen table with a notebook in front of her. She needed to clear her mind, to make sense of the mess she had created. She wrote down her thoughts, her fears, her desires. She wrote about her marriage to Greg, about the love they had once shared, and the emptiness she now felt. Then she wrote about David, how he made her feel, how he awakened parts of her she thought were long gone. But she also wrote about the guilt, the fear of destroying her family, of tearing apart a life she had worked so hard to build. Emily knew she couldn't keep living in this state of uncertainty. She had to make a choice, but it felt impossible to know what the right choice was. The days following her conversation with Greg felt like a blur to Emily. The house, once filled with the steady rhythm of everyday life, now felt like a battleground, one where the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. She had opened Pandora's box, and the emotions, the fears, and the truths were tumbling out faster than she could keep up. Greg had been distant since their talk, his usual steady presence now replaced with a quiet sadness that filled the house with an unsettling tension. They exchanged only brief words in passing, both of them retreating into their respective corners of the house, trying to process everything that had been said. Lily, too, had sensed the shift in the atmosphere. She was getting ready to leave for college, and though she was excited for the new chapter in her life, the changes at home seemed to weigh on her. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew something was wrong. Emily had tried to focus on her work, tried to immerse herself in the everyday tasks that once gave her comfort. But every time she looked up, every time she heard the sound of Greg's footsteps, the quiet ache in her chest reminded her that things had changed. She could no longer ignore the growing divide between her and the life she had once cherished. The heart-to-heart with Lily. One evening, as Emily was preparing dinner, Lily came downstairs, her suitcase already packed for her upcoming departure. She looked at Emily, her expression serious, and for a moment, Emily saw the child she had raised, so full of potential, so ready to leave the nest. But there was also something else in Lily's eyes, concern. "Mom, can we talk?" Lily asked, her voice quiet. Emily nodded, her stomach twisting. She had been avoiding this conversation, not knowing how to explain the cracks in their family to her daughter. She had always been the one to keep everything together, the one who managed the household with grace and ease. But now, she wasn't sure how to keep everything from falling apart. They sat at the kitchen table, the familiar clink of utensils on dishes the only sound for a few moments. "Is everything okay?" Lily asked, her gaze steady. "I know something's been off lately. You and Dad, you're not like you used to be." Emily swallowed hard, her emotions swirling inside her. She had to be honest with Lily. She couldn't lie to her daughter, not when Lily was about to step into the world as an adult. "Lily, your father and we're going through a difficult time," Emily began, her voice breaking as she spoke. "I don't want to go into too many details, but we're facing some challenges in our marriage." Lily's brow furrowed, and Emily could see the confusion in her daughter's eyes. "Challenges? What do you mean?" Emily sighed, feeling the weight of her words. She knew this wasn't a conversation she wanted to have, but Lily deserved to know the truth, even if it was painful. "I've been struggling with some things, Lily. I've been feeling disconnected from your father, and there's someone else in my life who's made me realize how much I've been missing. I know this isn't easy to hear, but I wanted you to know what's going on." Lily was silent for a long time, her eyes wide with shock. Emily could see the hurt in her daughter's face, the confusion that came from not fully understanding what had caused the rift between her parents. "You're talking about David, aren't you?" Lily finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded, feeling the weight of her daughter's words sink in. "Yes, it's about David. I don't want you to think that I'm trying to hurt your father or that I'm making any decisions lightly. But right now I'm just trying to figure things out." Lily leaned back in her chair, processing what her mother had just said. Emily could see the struggle in her daughter's face, the desire to hold onto the family they once had, while also grappling with the reality of the changes that were happening. "I just don't get it," Lily said, her voice trembling. "You and Dad have always been so solid. I don't understand how this happened." Emily's heart ached as she reached across the table and gently took Lily's hand. "I know, sweetie. I never wanted to hurt you or make you feel like things were falling apart. But sometimes, things change. People change." Lily squeezed her hand, her expression softening. "I don't know what to say, Mom. I just want everything to be okay again." "I do too," Emily whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I really do." The importance of self-discovery. After her conversation with Lily, Emily felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down at the unknown. The truth was out in the open now, her struggles, her feelings for David, her confusion about her marriage. But even with the weight of honesty between them, Emily knew that she still had a long road ahead of her. She had spent so much of her life living for others, fulfilling the roles of wife, mother, and daughter. But in doing so, she had lost sight of who she was, what she truly needed and desired. Now, as she faced the consequences of her actions, Emily realized that it was time to put herself first. It was time to understand what she wanted, without guilt or fear of disappointing anyone else. But could she find the courage to face this truth? Could she navigate the emotional landscape of her own heart and protect the values that had always been at the core of her identity? The woman who had once prided herself on being dependable, on keeping everything together, now had to learn how to break free from the expectations that had bound her for so long. A heartfelt letter to Greg. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Emily sat at the kitchen table with a pen and paper in front of her. She had already had the difficult conversation with her daughter, and now she needed to speak to Greg. They hadn't really talked since their heated exchange a few days ago, and Emily knew that if they were to move forward, whether together or apart, they needed to find a way to communicate honestly. She took a deep breath and began to write. She wrote about the love she still felt for Greg, the years they had spent together, and the sadness that had crept into their marriage. She wrote about the confusion she was feeling, the pull towards something new, and the guilt that weighed heavily on her heart. But most of all, she wrote about the need for both of them to grow, to find their own paths, even if that meant facing the painful reality that their marriage might no longer be enough. The sun had set, casting long shadows across the house, and for the first time in weeks, Emily felt a sense of calm settle over her. It wasn't the calm of certainty, nor the comfort of knowing everything would be okay, it was the quiet peace that came from finally facing the truth. She had spent so long running from her own desires, burying them beneath layers of responsibility, family, and obligation. But now, after everything that had happened, she realized that the only way to truly live, truly be alive, was to embrace her own journey. No more pretending. No more suffocating herself under the weight of other people's expectations. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions, heartbreak, guilt, fear, and hope. But as the dust settled, Emily knew that change was inevitable. She had already taken the first steps. Now, she had to move forward. A new beginning. The morning light crept through the curtains, soft and forgiving. Emily sat at the kitchen table with her coffee, her hands wrapped around the warm mug as she gazed out the window. She had spent the entire night awake, contemplating her future and what it would look like. The letter she had written to Greg was still in her bag. She hadn't given it to him yet, but she knew it was time. Today, she was going to have the conversation that had been looming over their lives. It wasn't going to be easy. It never was when it came to matters of the heart. But she couldn't keep waiting for things to fix themselves. She couldn't live in limbo anymore. Greg had been distant, but he had also been patient. He had given her the space to figure things out, and now it was time to meet him halfway. He deserved that honesty, just as she did. Emily stood up, her heart racing as she walked toward the living room. She found Greg sitting on the couch, his hands resting on his knees. His face was tired, but there was a quiet understanding in his eyes. He knew this moment was coming. "Greg," Emily began softly, sitting across from him. "We need to talk." The heartfelt conversation. Greg nodded, his face already bracing for the conversation he knew was inevitable. "I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about the other day," Emily continued, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "About where we are, where we've been, and where we're going." Greg didn't say anything at first. He just listened, his gaze never leaving hers. He was a man of few words, but Emily knew that his silence was his way of absorbing everything she had said. "I don't want to hurt you, Greg," Emily said, her voice cracking. "But I can't keep living like this. I've been so caught up in keeping everything together that I lost sight of myself. I've been emotionally distant for too long, and I need to figure out who I am, outside of this marriage, outside of being your wife." Greg's eyes softened, and he sighed deeply. "I know, Emily. I've known for a while. I've seen the distance growing between us. I didn't want to face it, but I knew it was there." Emily felt her chest tighten at his words. She had always prided herself on being a good wife, on being the glue that held everything together. But the truth was, she had been ignoring the cracks in their relationship for years. "I'm not saying that I don't love you, Greg," she said quietly. "I do. But love isn't enough anymore. We've changed, and I think we've both been pretending that things are still the same." Greg nodded slowly, his fingers gripping the edge of the couch. "I get it, Emily. I do. And I'm not blaming you. We both let things slip." There was a long pause, and Emily could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had been dreading this conversation, but now that it was happening, she realized how much she had needed it. "I think we need space," Emily said, the words finally flowing from her lips. "I think we need to figure out who we are, individually. We can't keep living in a relationship where we're just coexisting. That's not fair to either of us. Greg's eyes darkened, and Emily could see the hurt there. But she also saw something else: acceptance. He was, in his own way, letting her go. And she realized that, in a strange way, this was a gift they were giving each other, the gift of freedom, of rediscovery. "I don't want to lose you, Emily," Greg whispered, his voice filled with emotion. "But I don't want to keep holding you back either." The pain in Emily's chest threatened to swallow her whole, but she knew it was time to take that step. She had to honor her own journey, even if it meant breaking away from the life she had known for so long. Later that evening, as Emily stood by the window, watching the last of the sunlight fade from the sky, she felt a strange sense of peace. She had made the hardest decision of her life, and although she wasn't sure what the future held, she knew that she was doing the right thing. Her conversation with Greg had been painful, but it had also been necessary. They were both ready to move forward, to find their own paths, separately. The love they shared would always remain, but they both understood that they could no longer stay together out of obligation. As Emily thought about the future, she realized that she was no longer afraid. She wasn't afraid of the uncertainty that lay ahead, nor was she afraid of the changes she was about to face. She had spent so much of her life trying to please others, trying to fit into the mold of the perfect wife, mother, and daughter. But now, she could see that she had to live for herself. She had to honor her own desires, her own heart. She thought about David. She hadn't seen him in days, but she felt his presence in her mind, in her heart. He was part of this new chapter, but Emily knew she couldn't rush into anything with him. She had to give herself time to heal and discover who she was beyond her relationships. The next few months were a journey of self-discovery for Emily. She spent time reflecting on her life, her choices, and her future. She reconnected with old friends, started pursuing hobbies she had put on hold, and began to build a life that was truly her own. She found joy in the small moments, in the quiet mornings spent with a cup of tea, in the laughter of friends, in the simple pleasure of doing things just for herself. And when the time was right, she reached out to David again. Their connection, though still new, felt like something worth exploring. But Emily knew that she needed to approach it slowly, carefully. She had learned the importance of taking things one step at a time, of not rushing into anything out of fear or loneliness. As the seasons changed, so did Emily. She was no longer the woman who had hidden behind roles and expectations. She was becoming the woman she was always meant to be, free, alive, and unapologetically herself. And in that, she found the strength to build a new life, a life where she could love herself first, before anyone else. Her marriage with Greg had ended, but the love they shared would always be part of her. Emily had learned that love wasn't just about staying, it was also about knowing when to let go, when to give each other the space to grow. The story of Emily's rebirth wasn't just about the end of one chapter, it was the beginning of many more. She had learned the hardest lesson of all, that happiness comes from within, from being true to oneself, and from living a life that honors the soul. And as she stood at the edge of a new beginning, Emily smiled, knowing that no matter what came next, she was ready to embrace it with open arms.